My family and fiancé excommunicated me after my sister sabotaged me. I need a little advice on the matter as I don't know what to do anymore. I was 21 when my fiancé asked me to marry him. He was the absolute light of my life. We had known each other since preschool, our families are very close. He would come and have dinner with us on a daily basis and vice versa. He doesn't have any siblings but I have 2 older sisters. Which is very important as he was also very close with them. We grew up together. When we started dating, I don't think our parents stopped celebrating for weeks. He helped me deal with a lot of my anxiety, and even when I gained a little weight and my mother berated me saying he was going to leave me, he told her off and said he loved me for who I was, not for what I looked like, even though he claimed I was the most beautiful girl in the world to him. We were only engaged for 6 months before the incident. My middle oldest sister, let's call her Nikki, was a very cold person. She never showed any affection. She only ever opened up to my fiancé as she said she saw him as a brother, and he also helped her through a lot of her dark times such as battling drug addictions and breaking the law. She and I never saw eye to eye. I loved her dearly because she was my sister but didn't like her as a person. Out of the blue she tells me she wants to take me clubbing as we had never been together before, and she felt bad that she was so distant to me. I agreed, and that night we went out. Clubbing wasn't really my style, but once I had a few drinks, I loosened up a little and began having fun. The night was going smoothly until Nikki spotted a guy across the room whom she claimed she wanted to climb him like a tree. She walked over to him and within a few minutes she was back and she had a sour expression on her face. I asked her what was up but she never said anything. I kept pressing because I didn't want our night to be ruined. She then told me the guy didn't want her number but he wanted mine instead. I told her he was a loser and there were plenty of guys around who would kill to be with a girl like her. She didn't budge though. She told me she needed to use the restroom and then we would leave. I waited for another hour. During this time I was sipping on a lot of different cocktails. I then started feeling really dizzy and lightheaded. I figured I'd just cab it home as I was certain Nikki had left. On the way out though, I bumped into a friend of Nikki's whom she had briefly dated. He asked me if I needed a hand to my car and I explained I was getting a cab. He said he was getting ready to leave and we could share one. I told him okay and we walked out of the club together and into the first cab we saw. I tried to find my phone in my purse but I felt myself getting dizzier and dizzier. I don't remember what happened next as I blacked out, and the next morning I woke up on a hard sofa, my head pounding. When I came to, I realized I was in Nikki's friend's house and my phone was sitting on the glass table in front of me, but it was dead on battery. When he noticed I was awake he offered some tablets and water and explained that I had passed out in the cab and he didn't remember my parents' address, so he just picked me up and took me back here where he laid me on the sofa. I told him I needed to go home as my fiancé would be worried. He called a cab and I left. When I arrived at my parents' house, my mother, father, Nikki, my fiancé and his parents were all standing in the living room. I thought they were worried about me, but the instant I opened my mouth my fiancé asked how could I do this to him? I tried to explain that my phone was dead but he then went on screaming about how I cheated on him. I was baffled. Why would he think that? I tried to explain the night's events but I kept getting cut off. Nikki then chimed in and said I was lying and asked how I could be so heartless to a man who has been there for me through thick and thin. She went on to say I kept flirting with random guys all night, and then when she went to the bathroom, she saw me leave with her friend. I told her what had happened and she showed me photos on her phone where as we were leaving, his hand was on my back ushering me outside. Yes, the photo did look horrible and I was so drunk I didn't even realize his hand was on my back at all. My fiancé was so angry, he kept shouting and his mom and mine were both crying. I then asked Nikki to call her friend and he would confirm nothing happened, but when she called him, he told a completely different story. He said I begged him to take me back to his, and when he did, we slept together multiple times. I saw red and started crying and yelling at Nikki because I knew she had organized this whole thing to make me look bad. I begged my fiancé to believe me, but he just shook his head and left. When everyone had cleared out, my mother slapped me across the face and told me to get out. I left and went to a friend's house where I stayed for a few nights. During those nights I called my fiancé crying and pleading with him to believe me that nothing happened, but it all fell on deaf ears as he never returned any of my calls or texts. My mom texted me and told me she was kicking me out and that she couldn't believe I would do such a thing, and a lot of hurtful other slurs I don't think I could repeat here. She didn't even give me time to get my things as she threw everything out. I was now homeless. None of my family would take me in, as they chose my fiancé and mother's side. I was homeless and single in less than a day and a half. My entire world had been taken away because of Nikki's lies. Now for weeks I tried everything to get my fiancé and my family back. The limit for me though was when Christmas time had come and I went over to my mother's house to try and reconcile. I was sleeping from couch to couch during this time. When I got to my parents' house, I knocked on the door but no one answered. My friend then called me and told me she just saw on Facebook that my family were in another state celebrating Christmas and they had posted pictures online. Everyone was there, my sisters, parents, grandparents and even my fiancé and his family. When I myself saw the photos, I couldn't stop crying as they all looked so happy. I cried for days and days before deciding to block them all. I even returned my engagement ring. My friend knew someone a couple hours away who was looking for some help in his restaurant, and he even had living arrangements above where he worked so I could get rent at a cheap price and work at the same time. I wanted to start over with my life as it hurt me that no one took my side and they all left me to fend for myself. I was able to move pretty quickly and was doing well. The apartment was tiny and I had to work 10+ hours almost every day, but I was able to save a lot of money. I'm not living in the apartment anymore. I was able to rent a much nicer condo, but I am still working at the restaurant as assistant manager. Now it has been roughly 2 years since I left and have not spoken to any of my family. I had no idea what was going on with them until I got a knock on my door. It was my ex-fiancé. I was shocked to say the least. All these feelings came rushing back and all I wanted to do was jump into his arms. But then I remembered the pain I had felt and tried to slam the door in his face, but he stopped it and asked that I let him explain. He said that Nikki had gotten married and she had confessed that she lied about the situation because she had found someone she loved so much and realized what a horrible thing she had done. I asked him how he found me and he said my friend told him. My entire family has been trying to get in touch with me and want to see me. I told him I needed time to see if I even wanted to have them in my life. He left and I have been a mess since. I don't know what to do. I know I will never ever forgive Nikki. She could rot for all I cared, but it's hard because my other family and fiancé didn't know she was lying, but I also felt like they abandoned me too quickly without letting me explain my side. I don't know if I should forgive them. Any advice would be very helpful. I got the sweetest revenge on my roommate after the heinous things she did to me. In 2008 I had just left my husband. I caught him cheating multiple times, and I was just over it. A new girl, we will call her Amy, started at my job and we made a fast friendship. I was in the middle of packing up and moving out of my house. I needed a roommate for a new apartment I was looking at because my wages weren't going to pay the bills, so we moved in together and lived peacefully together for a while. I was moving on with my life. I had gotten a better paying job, was spending time with my friends, and I felt okay with life at the time. At the time I was 25, single, and not looking for anything serious, so I had a friends with benefits who would stop over a few times a week. Amy was cool with it on the surface. It did not affect her in any way. My friend didn't hang out at our place. He didn't eat at our place. He didn't use our household supplies. My relationship with him affected her exactly 0%, but I guess she was a little annoyed about the fact that I was getting some attention and she was not. She would flirt with him, go visit him where he worked, etc., but he was absolutely not interested in her. This is where things started to go downhill. For context, she had been married a few times, she was 13 years older than me, and all the dads had full custody of their respective kids. She was dating someone but he was already in a relationship, so he wasn't about to commit to anything besides stopping by for 30 minutes after he worked the night shift every day. I tried to point out all the red flags, but she was convinced it was love. This dude used to hit me constantly in front of her. He was very open about being in a committed relationship with his girlfriend, so I have no idea why Amy thought this was going anywhere. After a few months I met someone I wanted to be serious with, so we started dating. We will call the guy Tom. Tom and I got serious pretty fast. He was living in a horrible situation, so he moved in with Amy and I pretty quickly. I think it was after about a month of dating. So we have our room and she has her own room. The bills went from a 50-50 split to 3-way split to make sure things were still even. We had a shared kitchen, living room, and bathroom. After Tom moved in, she started openly hitting on him in front of me. Every guy I had at my house she had to hit on, even if they were just friends. None of them ever took her up on it. Every single one turned her down, and I think this added greatly to her oncoming behavior. Over the next couple of weeks Amy did a complete 180. She stopped paying rent, refused to buy any food, and would just eat whatever Tom and I bought, and would not wash her dishes. We had 2 cats, one was hers and one mine, and she would never clean the litter in her room, so her cat would use our hallway floor as a bathroom every single day. Every day when I got home from work there was a big steaming pile of cat shit right inside my front door, sitting in the middle of a giant puddle of urine. My cat was locked in my room at night with her own supplies, so there was 0 chance it was her. It was the same thing every morning by the front door. Whenever she was done eating the food she stole from me, she would set her plate with the leftovers on the kitchen floor for her cat to pick at. She would leave the plate there for days. To the point that if I didn't pick them up, there would be multiple plates on the floor with food in various stages of decay. All of my dishes started going missing, except for the cat's plates, of course. And what dishes were left, she refused to wash ever. She used my toilet paper, my laundry soap, even my tampons. This went on for about 2 months and it just kept getting progressively worse. She would use panty liners every day and would change them multiple times a day and stuff them in the garbage can in the bathroom. She would leave it there completely overflowing and spilling onto the floor for days until I caved and put on gloves and threw them out. The trash can would be full in about a week, so this happened a few times. That's not even the worst of it. My expensive DSLR camera went missing. I was a photography hobbyist at the time, but it was my dream to be a professional photographer and own my own photography business. I would shoot stuff for friends and family as practice, and one day I grabbed my camera bag from the shared living room, and as soon as I picked it up, I felt my heart sink into my stomach. You know that instant dread that grips you the second you realize something truly gut-wrenching has happened. I opened the bag and of course the camera is gone. That was an expensive camera for that time of my life, and it was a gift from my parents, so I was truly devastated. I couldn't prove a thing and I wasn't even sure how long it had been missing. It could have been her boyfriend that took it, but either way it was gone. So now this is it. This is the last straw. I need this girl out. I went from nice girl to a fucking psycho in about 30 seconds. I'm not the violent type and I hate confrontation. I'm not waiting for a fucking eviction to go through, and I really didn't have the money for that anyway, so here's where I start my petty revenge. Amy wants to live here with me rent-free, stealing my shit, hitting on my boyfriend, and neglecting her cat, so be it. But it's going to be on my fucking terms. One vital piece of information. In my divorce, the dickhead moved back in with mom and I took everything from the house to my new apartment, so I owned everything and the lease was in my name. I started by changing the Wi-Fi password and the computer password. The following week I had my cable company come and remove the cable lines to her room. I bought a small fridge for my room and a cabinet and put all my food and personal supplies in my bedroom and put a secure lock on my door. I hid my pots and pans. I locked up the soap and toilet paper. The cabinets were empty. I paid for it all, and I would be the only one using it. When her cat shit on the floor, I would pick it up and smear it on her bedroom doorknob. Overflowing bathroom trash cans filled to the brim with her panty liners were dumped on her bed. I removed the knobs to the washer and the dryer. I did everything possible to make her life uncomfortable. I did other small stuff. Anything that came to mind. A few months prior, Amy and I had been working at the same store and she borrowed another coworker's laptop. She ended up getting fired, but she never gave the laptop back and the coworker was really trying to get it back from her. Amy ghosted her, of course, so while she was out one day, I went in and took the laptop and gave it back to its rightful owner. Amy called the cops on me and said I stole her computer, but I explained what happened. She admitted to the cops that the computer wasn't hers and the cops said it wasn't their problem anymore. That one really made her hate me. She wasn't working at the time, so it's not like she had money to do anything or buy anything. She was literally just existing in a room in my apartment. She would disappear during the day, but I have no idea where she was going. She moved out after about 6 weeks. When she moved out of my apartment, I didn't even know she had left. I just noticed she wasn't coming or going for about a week. So Tom and I cleaned out her room. She left clothes, broken furniture, a cardboard dresser, and 5 39-gallon garbage bags of trash we collected from the mass piles of panty liners, rotting food, and ordinary trash we found in the room. It's a miracle we didn't have roaches. I found all my missing dishes, silverware, and cups all covered in food and grossness. I just threw it all away. I wish I still had the photos though. Oddly enough, about 6 months later, I opened my back door to take out the trash and my camera was in a bag hanging from my doorknob. I know Amy definitely didn't return it. For about 2 years after, every time I would find out that Amy was living with someone new, I would message them and send them the photos of her room. Papers in the trash that had her name on them. And I would tell them the whole story. One time it caused the people she was living with to throw her shit out on the porch. She had just moved in and they had small kids and they didn't want to risk it with her. I stopped after that. She knew it was me telling them too, so I figured I had sufficiently made my point. My boyfriend hasn't been the same since we went on vacation. If I hadn't drunk an entire gallon of tea back at the hotel, maybe none of this would have happened. Well, maybe if we hadn't gotten kicked out of the hotel, none of this would have happened. It had been just the two of us in the small car, but with the animosity heavy in the air, it felt overcrowded. I don't know what had been worse, the hour of arguing, the 2 hours of silence afterwards, or the burgeoning realization that maybe I didn't know him as well as I thought I did. I studied him out of the corner of my eye. We'd been together for several months, but the recent experience left me wondering if I had ever even met the real Brian, who he truly was on the inside. It had been our very first trip together. We'd saved up for one of those super fancy hotels and had been having a great time, until, of course, Brian decided to attempt a 5-finger discount in the jewelry store in the lobby. He'd told me when we first started dating that he'd had some run-ins with the law in the past, when he was young, and that was the only way to put food on the table, and I'd understood. But this wasn't the same. It wasn't for survival, it was just greed. We'd both spent the rest of our vacation money and then some, paying for that $1,800 watch so no charges would be pressed. They still kicked us out. I don't blame them. Asking him to stop at the next place we came across was the first thing I'd said to him in hours, and he nodded, solemnly. My discomfort was escalating to the point where I was considering asking him to pull over on the side of the road, rain be damned, when we saw the dim sign flickering in the distance. The small store was out of place on the quiet, tree-lined mountain road. We'd been deep in a tunnel of trees and hadn't seen so much of a hint of the lights in the distance. It seemed to just appear into view as we went around the bend. I didn't recall seeing it on the way to the hotel, so it was a pleasant surprise. I felt a flood of relief wash over me. It stuck out in the otherwise beautiful mountain landscape, windows so dirty that the light inside barely reached us through them, several letters on the sign lit up in such a way that the only word we could even see was a blood-red dash mark flickering. Any relief I'd managed to feel was short-lived. When we walked in, we both froze as we took in the interior. I instantly wished we'd just stopped by the side of the road after all. I looked at Brian and could tell he felt it too. He was fiddling with his new watch and took off his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt, and put them back on, as if that would make what he was seeing make more sense. There were no other customers, no employees visible, it was just the two of us. Ceiling tiles hung askew, and the floor was filthy. We had to step over a drain in the floor with grimy stains circling it, to walk in. If it weren't for the lights, gentle hum of the AC, and grinding sounds floating from down the long hallway at the back, I'd have thought the place was abandoned. It was humid inside, and the smell coming from the old coolers that lined the back walls hit me as soon as we walked in. It reminded me of the summer my dad had decided to dabble in taxidermy in our basement. The slight hint of rot that lingered on the damp air indicated poorly done taxidermy, at that. As I darted towards the back towards the restroom sign, a placard dangling off it caught my eye, informing me the restroom was for paying customers only. I quickly perused the shelves for something to buy. The aisles were tall, nearly to the ceiling, and despite the store being somewhat small, I felt the panic sense of being cornered and trapped in an endless maze, at risk of becoming lost in there forever. The food on the shelves resembled nothing like the usual chips and candy these types of stores carried. There were rows upon rows of soft-looking mystery items in plastic wrap. Some of them leaked a red-brown residue down the shelves. None of it looked remotely appealing. I passed by a section with a stained placard that said handcrafted from local artists that was filled with eclectic items, none of which seemed to go together. There were torn shirts with random logos, nothing related to the town or area we were in, stained with mud, grass, and God knows what else. Dried ropey things formed small and delicate sculptures of animals unlike any I'd seen before. I reached for a bracelet with intricately carved white beads but nearly dropped it when I realized the band was made up of woven human hair. It left a residue on my hand, and I noticed then that the same sour rot smell was coming from the collection of items, too. I opted for a flat and lukewarm Dr. Pepper instead, and placed two $2 coins on the glass counter in front of the hand-scrawled shoplifters will be processed sign near the register. I figured I misread it. After all, it looked like it had been written by a hand unused to holding a pen. Brian had grabbed an armful of those unnerving plastic wrapped packages but hovered at the counter a bit too long. I could hear the scrape of him retrieving the coins on the glass, the sound of him dropping them into his pocket. He gave me a pointed stare as he did so. I sighed, so tired of arguing that I just walked away from him and down the hallway. I figured I'd pay, again, after he got back in the car. No sooner had I closed the door to the women's room behind me, than I could hear him talking to someone. His voice rose until he was nearly yelling. Mortified and trying to delay being involved in another incident that day, I splashed water on my face while trying to drown out what appeared to be a one-sided argument. I kept trying to wash the grimy feeling that had lingered on my hands after picking up the bracelet, but no matter how I scrubbed, I couldn't get it off. It kept getting worse. I felt nauseous when I realized the greasy residue was coming from the pale yellow bar of soap. I decided I'd scrub my hands raw at our next stop, and stepped out into the hall and back to the store. Brian wasn't there. I called out for him, but all I heard in answer was that same vague whirring and drilling sound coming from further down the long hallway. I doubled back to the car, but found it empty. I circled the store, my frustration turning to panic as I shouted his name and still got no response. I called his phone, it just rang, and rang before going to voicemail. The car was locked and he had the keys. I couldn't help but feel nervous, standing out there in the rain. We were still in the middle of the deep woods and with clouds obscuring the light of the moon and stars, the area was blanketed in darkness. I reluctantly headed back inside. Somehow, the smell had managed to become even worse. I gagged when the wet, disgusting air hit my nose again. It was so strong I could nearly taste it, putrid on my tongue. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was always someone just behind me as I walked quickly through the tall aisles, but whenever I looked over my shoulder, there was never anything there. I called his phone, wondering how I'd managed to lose him in such a small store when I finally heard it ringing. It was echoing from down that long hallway. As I headed towards it, I heard someone moving on the other side of the floor-to-ceiling aisle, placing something onto the shelf with a sickening wet thud, before weaving lightly through the aisles behind me. "Brian?" I called out softly, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, trying to disguise my fear. I knew it wasn't him. I don't know how, but I knew it. Have you ever had the feeling that if you look closely enough at something, if you truly see it, you'll never be able to close your eyes again without it haunting you? That feeling of being in close proximity to something that your fragile mind was never meant to know existed? I forced myself to turn around anyways. Once again, whoever or whatever had been there was gone by the time I rounded the aisle, but I heard a gentle clinking sound, and saw a trail of red paint droplets. I followed it back to that section, handcrafted from local artists. There was something new hanging from a hook near the shelves. Wet, glistening strips dangled from along what looked to be a curved bone with bits of gristle still attached. From one of them hung an expensive men's wristwatch, another was tied around a shattered, thick glasses lens. Yet another sagged under the weight of car keys. They gently swayed with the motion of having been recently placed. Fluid continued to drip from the still wet viscera and mingled with the mud on my shoes. Shoplifters will be processed. I didn't need to see the items down the other aisles to figure out what I was looking at, what must have happened. I could already tell that we'd never have another argument, ever again. I heard a door open and close in the back, soft footsteps approaching from down that hallway. I realized that in my distraction, I'd forgotten to put money back on the counter. I choked up, but knew there was nothing I could do for him. So, I tossed the first bills I found in my purse onto the floor, frantically untangled the car keys, and in shock, I drove myself the remaining 4-hour drive home. Every so often, along the quiet country roads, those I could have sworn were empty on the drive up, I'd see that grimy building, the sign, marked flashing in the distance. I didn't stop once. I've been home for a week now. A few nights ago, something triggered a motion alert on my video doorbell, but there was no one there when I checked the footage. The next morning, I found a cardboard box on my porch, with no stamp or return address. In it was a torn t-shirt, and several of those now familiar wrapped packages, putrid fluid leaking out of them through the bottom of the soggy cardboard. I've received a similar box every night, since. I don't know if it's meant as a threat, or if due to some sort of twisted interpretation, I'm now a paying customer - he's slowly being returned to me. Either way, it turns out that I've gotten to see who Brian was on the inside, after all.